know, Don has had a career that spans over 50, 60 years in the film and television industry. Worked on over 90 feature films and television shows. He started, his first feature credit was in 1956, where I think if judging from the looks of him, he must have been about 4 years old when he started working in the film business. Don worked on all these movies and all these television shows, and he was also the sound editing department head for Fox Studios under Irwin Allen. He later formed his own production company at the Sam Goldwyn Studios. He was post-production supervisor of director of editorial at Walt Disney, and also VP of post-production and editorial at Disney, and also post-production supervisor for Quinn Martin and Aaron Spelling Goldberg Productions. He was also governor in the Academy on the Board of Governors for over 18 years, quite a long time. I think one of the longest-standing governors, actually, at the Academy, and we'll be talking more about that. And, of course, he's been a professor here at USC since 1996, where I first met him and took him under my wing and helped him succeed and excel here. I don't usually do this. I mean, I usually throw out a bunch of credits, whoever I'm interviewing, but the sheer number and quality of the productions and the people he's worked with over the years is truly staggering. And so I just have to mention off a few of them. Going back to the early days, working on films like I Want to Live, the Susan Hayward picture, which I loved, with the great Robert Wise, who was an editor, became a director, of course. The Big Country with William Wyler, Michael Curtiz, Otto Preminger, John Wayne, Stanley Kramer, Samuel Goldwyn Jr., Julien Duvivier, who people may know is a great blacklisted director and director of the film Rififi and Never on Sunday, Norman Jewison, George Roy Hill and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, MASH with Robert Altman, Patton, Tora 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 with the great Dick Fleischer as the director. Of course, my favorite, Beyond the Valley of the Dolls with Russ Meyer. I don't know why Don wouldn't show any clips from that. I could have gotten him some, but anyway. The French Connection, William Friedkin. Walkabout, which is a terrific movie by Nicholas Roeg, who was a great cinematographer who became director. Our own Lawrence Terman directed a picture that Don worked on in the sound department. Lawrence Terman, who's a producer of The Graduate and many other films. Ronald Neame, The Poseidon Adventure. Ronald Neame is also a director of my favorite musical, Scrooge, with Albert Finney from around 1970 or so. Emperor of the North, Robert Aldrich. Emperor of the North is a great movie with Lee Marvin, Ernest Borgnine. Robert Aldrich, of course, the great director from the 50s and 60s. Worked with John Frankenheimer, with Irwin Allen, obviously, on Towering Inferno and all the TV shows we'll talk about. Peter Bogdanovich and his musical venture, a movie called At Long Last Love. Robert Altman, again, Buffalo Bill and the Indians. MASH. Also, Burt Reynolds as a director. Don worked with Burt as director on Gator and a couple other pictures. Arthur Hiller, Silver Streak. Peter Yates, who I believe directed Bullet, if I'm not mistaken. Michael Ritchie, Hal Ashby. Again, Burt Reynolds. Ron Howard, Night Shift, 1982. Worked with Sylvester Stallone on Staying Alive. Brainstorm, directed by Doug Trumbull. It goes on and on. Mark Lester, Michael Crichton, Bud Yorkin. And we end up with Alfonso Arau. Alfonso Arau, of course, who's in the Wild Bunch and became a director of A Walk in the Clouds and a number of other pictures, a couple of which Don has worked with. So it's just tremendous body of work with some of the most stellar names in the movie business. And I'm so proud to be here to talk to you about some of these things. So thank you. Give Don another warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. I'm glad you worked from your notes because I'm going to work from my notes too. You know, when Tom first approached me and asked me to do this event, I'd said, sure, I'd love to. And then when I turned on it and I said, well, what am I going to talk about? So I went back to an old saying or an old adage that I know, you won't know where to go if you don't know where you came from. And so we're going to go back and visit the past, okay? We're going to look at some of the films that he had mentioned, but the films that I really want to talk about are the films that had directors that I knew pretty well and had a personal interaction with them. but because I teach in this room, okay? Every Monday morning. So to me, it's just like another class. So simply, I want to tell you one thing that I always tell my students. There are only three components to a motion picture, right? Story, image, and sound. The story, every person, every piece of equipment, every dollar is dedicated to telling the story. Now the image, this is what I want to make an impression on you. 90% of the crew is highly dependent on camera. That means that everybody that works on the film, including all the salaries and whatnot, are 90% devoted to the image. Sound, 10%. Isn't that amazing? And yet the motion picture is 50% image and 50% sound. Add it up. It doesn't add up, but emotionally it does. Because what we do is 50% of the motion picture, if not more sometimes. Right? You guys get that? It's going to be in the quiz at the end of the show. Right. But before I begin, I want to publicly say the key to my success was Gordon Sawyer at the Samuel Goldwyn Studios. He was vice president of Samuel Goldwyn Productions and head of the highly respected Goldwyn Sound Department, where many, many, many of our great sound people emanated from. And he was the one that just took it, said, Don, can you do this? Sure. And he gave me film after film. And the first film that we're going to look at is The Alamo, because even though I was just starting out at the time, he said, you can handle this, Don. We're gonna let you do The Alamo. So here are my first thoughts on the film. Shall I continue?
Sure.
Okay.
On this particular film, you mean? On the Alamo?
Yeah.
No, I don't want you to do that yet.
You don't want me to do that yet?
No, I want to go back farther in time than
Okay.
before we do that.
Right.
I don't want to jump to 1965 when I want to jump back to little baby Don Hall. Little baby Don Hall grew up in Berkeley, California, right?
That's true.
And your family is a Chinese-American family, right? Your father's from China, from mainland China, yes? And what was your original name of your family's name? The original?
Ho.
It was the Ho family, right? And when did that get changed? Do you have any, did your father?
I don't know, because all my older brothers and sisters were all named Ho, and then my sister that's closest to me, we are named Hall. So I just figured that the nurse at the hospital, when we were born, filled in the birth certificate wrong. I mean, that's always
Both of you, right? Okay.
right.
And so your father was a restaurateur. You originally, you said originally, I think you had a restaurant. Where was it? It was in the...
Well, my dad always wanted to have a restaurant. When he came over from China, of course, he came over under a different name. But he worked really hard. He worked as a janitor at the International House in Berkeley. And then he had opened up a restaurant, maybe 4 or 5 tables in our living room. And that was his first crack at having a restaurant. And then his dream was to open a restaurant, and he did that in Vallejo, California. So my sister and I, we used to go up there every weekend and worked in the restaurant, took the Greyhound bus up. And that's probably when I decided I did not want to be in the restaurant. So we lived in Berkeley only because my mother thought that it was a better city with better education, and it was just a larger city. So we commuted every weekend up to Vallejo to be with my father at the restaurant.
And you graduated from Berkeley High School?
I graduated from Berkeley High School, and my wife, Teddy, graduated from Berkeley High School. We were childhood friends.
I think we call it sweethearts where we come from.
Right. She's been at my side ever since.
And so you went, once you graduated high school, you decided to go to school. Did you go to the military then? You joined the military first for the money, or did you go to school first?
Well, I joined the military because I wanted to take advantage of this was at the end of World War I, but the war had already ended. And, but I wanted to take advantage of the provisions of the GI Bill, which would be 5220. Anybody here know 5220? Wow. When they discharged you, $20 weeks. But more important than that, I was able to go to school.
Now, this was between the Second World War and Korea, so you were lucky to miss the Korean War, I suppose, right?
Well, that's a story that not too many people know. When I graduated from, not graduated, when I was discharged, I was automatically in the Marine Corps Reserve. But somehow or other, when I moved back to Berkeley, I lost all my papers, including my diploma from school, and also my discharge papers, so I had no idea when my term was up. So it expired automatically, and then the Korean War started. So I wasn't called up because everybody that was in the reserves was called up back to active duty at the time.
Now, had you already gotten married at that time? Were you guys already married, or did you marry after?
No, we married after.
After that, okay.
Right.
Otherwise, I thought maybe Teddy would have burned the discharge papers so that. Okay, all right, good.
No, I came down here to go to school, and I went to school at the Art Center School because what I really wanted to do with the boom of architecture at that time, following the war, I figured I would like to be an architectural photographer. And I was in the classroom one day at the Art Center School, and somebody came in and said, "Does anybody in here want to go into films?" Hey, sounded great. I didn't know what films was at the time. So Hal Stegeman, he was a classmate of mine, we raised our hands. And then we became the first film class at the Art Center School. And that was right down in Westlake Park. I don't think anybody would dare go down there now, but that's where the photo school was located, and also on 3rd Street.
So that was downtown before you moved to Pasadena, right?
Right, before it became the college.
And you graduated from there as one of the first students in the first film program there.
Yeah, just the two of us were the first students.
And so after you graduated school, what made you try to go into the industry? You worked at Mercury Productions, this company?
Well, I was hired right out of school by a small company called Mercury International Pictures. I didn't know I was that fortunate at the time because a lot of people, when they come out of film schools, they don't get hired at all. I mean, until they work a while. But I was hired. I did camera work. I did editing work. We did mostly industrial films. And television commercials were just starting to become popular at the time. So we worked on a lot of TV spots and things of that nature.
And you were working as a cameraman and an editor at the time, both?
Yes, that was a beautiful part of it because we were not part of the union yet. So we were flexible. We could do sound, we could do picture, we could do editing. And then this company was so successful, the union stepped in and said that we'd like to unionize you, and which they did. And when they took us into the union, I didn't know what that really meant. He said, "Don, you can become, you can go in the editors union and you can go into the cinematography union." Well, I couldn't afford both, so I chose editing because cinematography at that time, being a camera person on the stage, to me was like being in prison. There was only one telephone. The telephone was handled by the assistant director, and you could never take time off. You had to show up at the time of the call, whenever your time was, and work to the end of the day. So I took editing because I looked at it as probably a little more freedom, something that I really wanted to do. But I wish I could have done both. And then when I went into editing, I applied for a job at Fox because they had something open down there. And I didn't know that major studios had their own seniority system, which meant that I was in group 3, and everybody there had to work before you got to work on anything that was worthwhile. And the union had a seniority system. So all this was new to me. So I went to Fox, and I actually was lucky because they said, Don, you could do sound editing if you want, and you can work there 8 years, and then you can become a picture editor. So I started on that. I started working in sound, and I loved it. I didn't want to do anything else.
Now, you said that, so in picture editing, you had to wait a much longer time in order to become an editor.
You had to become 8 years.
Right,
Right.
right, as an assistant, right? And then, but in sound, it was like 3 years or 18 months?
Well, they allowed me because I had of my past experience.
Okay. So you could actually start working much quicker than if you'd stayed in picture editing.
Right. Mhm.
So that's how you started into the sound path.
Right.
Now, what was it, do you say, would you have an, I mean, on some level, you want to be an architect, you had studied photography, you'd done photography, cinematography, you'd done editing. Would you say, did you have an affinity for sound, or what was it that excited you about doing sound?
Well, it was just a different way of telling the story. I just enjoy doing it, that's all. You know how some things are, because everybody in this room who's a student here, you want to be directors, I think, most of you. Or a writer. But you will find that your paths will change as you work in the business. And I think just about everybody that's here, that's on faculty, and thank you for coming tonight, they didn't end up doing what they're doing, what they did, as their first choice. It was just a path that you take. There's no reason for it. There's just different needs, you know. Sometimes it's financial needs. Sometimes it's discovering something that you didn't really think you wanted to do, but you wanted to. And that's a good thing about this school. We present to you, and we don't advertise it. Everybody comes here, wants to be a director, but then they're exposed to cinematography. They're exposed to the writing school. They're exposed to editing. They're exposed to sound. And they like some of those other areas that they go into. And then they make a choice from that.
And so the first picture you worked on was Julie, right? That's 1956 or something like that?
I worked on a picture called Julie. It had Doris Day in it, big name at the time. And we edited, Fred Brown and I edited sound on that in a bedroom in this person's house that reclaimed Mag. And but it was our first start, and it was a good film. And so I look at that as my beginning of my career.
Beginning of your career.
Mhm.
Okay, good. So, you know, you worked out with Preminger before you worked with John Wayne, but we can go ahead and jump to the Alamo if you'd like to. How did that happen? You'd obviously been taken under Gordon Sawyer's wing, and he'd helped get you started. And the Alamo was a picture he was also working on, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what was your experience on that, on working on that picture?
Well, it was something that I really didn't expect, because it was the most expensive film ever made to date up to that time, the Alamo. I just didn't know what the scope of it was. They started shooting in July or August on location down in Brackettville, Texas. But I stayed home because Teddy was pregnant, and I wanted to wait for my firstborn to be born. And the minute Jeff was born, boom, I was gone. I was, right? And I was thinking back on it, and I think, what a terrible thing to do, you know? Leave your wife at home with a new baby. But it's something that's going to happen to all of you, because you can't dictate when things happen in this business. When it happens, you do it. And if you don't do it, then you don't end up doing it. So it's just part of.
It was also a different world. I remember someone telling me that their father sent flowers to his wife in the hospital when the baby was born. They don't go, they don't show up. They wait till the baby comes to the house eventually.
I couldn't afford flowers.
Now, this was a picture that was not only starred John Wayne, but it was directed by John Wayne.
Produced and directed.
Right. And what was your experience of working with him? I mean, what kind of guy was he?
Well, it's the first time I worked with John, but you know, the scope of the picture, I want to look at my notes here because I don't want to leave anything out. It took place, it was about the Alamo, the fall of the Alamo, and it was historical. maybe not totally historical, Hollywood historical, okay? And I flew down there in October, and they had already been shooting. But the thing that really, really amazed me was that, in those days, there was no CGI. And this was a big picture. It was about the taking of the Alamo by the Mexican army. So they had 7,000 extras at one time or another. And they had 1,500 horses, which they took a year to train before the shooting started. So when I got down there, I was welcome. And right away, I started recording sound effects for the film. They gave me a platoon of 30 soldiers with horses. And some of those horses weren't trained. And so to record all the effects I needed. On top of that, I had access to all the guns, cannons, explosives, just everything. So it was good because Brackettville and that location were so vast that they could be shooting a mile away and you wouldn't hear what was happening, and that allowed us to record some sound. And Doug Vaughn, we got probably maybe the first Nagra that came out, 1958. And if we didn't have that to shoot with, we would have had to have a recording trailer pulled out everywhere. But the Nagra really helped us in recording sound effects.
So that early, so really in 1958, that must have been really the advent of the use of the Nagra.
Yeah, that was the advent. Well, that's when at the end of 1958 is when the first Nagra used in motion pictures came out. I think it was the Nagra 3 or something like that.
For those few people who don't know what the Nagra is a recording device, a tape recorder, basically recording production sound, and it's only about this big. So it's something you can take with you. People can use it in documentaries, they can use it in features, but it's a much more portable way of recording sound, which was something which, prior to the invention of this machine, made recording sound much more difficult on location.
Something I really have to add is because, sound and music usually doesn't work together well. And I can see everybody that's in sound editing knows what I'm talking about. Dmitri Tiomkin, the distinguished Russian composer, he was a composer on this film. And this was in post-production. And I truly enjoyed working with what we call Dimi. So effects and music got along very well. But there was one sequence, it's a sequence that you're going to be seeing pretty soon, is the before the battle starts, the massing of the Mexican army and the drums. Whoever cut the drums on the film did not satisfy Dimi's what he wanted to hear. He was done on location too. So I said, Dimi, if you don't mind, I would like to take the drums and I would like to cut it myself. He said, fine, go ahead. But the one thing that Dimi did when we showed up on the dubbing stage, being Dmitri Tiomkin, a wonderful composer, I mean, he really is a wonderful composer, he put a kettle drum hit over every cannon shot. And if you've never been on the dubbing stage before and fighting the score, this was the end. So Duke looked at him and said, oh, we can't have that. We have to have real cannons. So we got the cannons back.
Okay. Should we watch it? Should we take a look?
Yeah.
Particular scene? Great. So Stan, if you show us the Alamo.
It's hard to believe that this was shot in 65 millimeter, which I think most of you know that the average film size is 35 millimeter. 65 was the new size mega film that came out for the big hits, for the bigger shows. And so the cameras were very heavy. That's why you don't see too much. In fact, there was no handheld stuff. It just couldn't hold the camera. And it's very grainy here, but it was pretty spectacular on the screen. And it was in 6-track. It was in 6-track, not the way we do 6-track now, but when we cut this, we had to place everything for the 6 speakers behind the screen on what position they were going to be in on a separate unit. Because we didn't have what we call at the time pan pots, where we could pan sound from left to right and whatnot. So it was pretty primitive in those days, but we got it done. There was only 5 of us that actually cut the effects on this show.
And you cut those drums that we heard there. But what do you think
I
of those drums, huh?
fixed
Pretty damn good drums, yes. You know, it's quite a beautiful line there. I love it when we've heard the music and we hear the drumming and the marching, and then there's that moment of silence. And they go, wow, that's loud, right?
What is that?
Beautiful, and that's a lovely moment there in the film. So now you would have worked with John Wayne again In Harm's Way a few years later, and that's another Otto Preminger movie. But so you'd work with Preminger on films before this, on Porgy and Bess and Anatomy of a Murder, right?
Right.
What was your relationship with Preminger, and how did that get started? What was the first project you did with him?
Well, that was pretty interesting because Otto Preminger was the default director on Porgy and Bess. I think very few people saw Porgy and Bess because it was just released once, and then it was just put in a vault and never shown again. And Samuel Goldwyn did that film, of course. And I was pretty good friends with Sammy Goldwyn Jr. because I did a couple of shows that he worked on. And I said, Sammy, I said, when are you going to ever release Porgy and Bess again? He said, well, I don't have it because it's not in his estate. But then when he acquired it, I think he still had the feeling that it was too racist, and he didn't want to release it. And then before he could anyway, Sammy passed away. But it's a film that most people have never seen. You know, it's a good film. But the thing, for those of you who are on shooting schedules and do a lot of shooting, the Porgy and Bess set was built on the Goldwyn lot, and on the day of the shooting, that set was burnt down, and that was a racist thing. So they rebuilt the set, and they started shooting shows. Now, the thing that happens in those days is that, for me anyways, that the sound editor was always put on at the beginning of the shoot, which I think is very, very beneficial to the film. But they don't do that probably as much today. They just put on and they're laid off. They put on the laid off for previews or whatnot. But they just kept us on from beginning to end. So it was a good time for us at that time. It wasn't a good time because I was never home. So can I go on with Harm's Way?
Well, so wait, so go back to Preminger for a second. So Preminger obviously was a well-known actor, producer, and director. What kind of working relationship did you have with him? I mean, you used to go in his office and talk to him once in a while.
Well, yeah. Well, I first met Otto Preminger on Porgy and Bess. Then I worked with him on
Anatomy.
Anatomy of Murder. And then the third picture, the one we're going to see, is In Harm's Way. That was in 1965. So quite a few years have passed since then.
He had a reputation for being sort of a tyrannical figure, right?
Otto, yeah. They called him Otto the Ogre. It was strange because Otto was he had a temper too. I mean, he had a temper. And he would just about fire somebody every day of the week of shooting. So people just stayed away from him. They wanted to work on the films because he was making good films, but they didn't want anything personal to do with him because they're afraid that they might alienate him. But I didn't feel that way about Otto because I started with him. I didn't know any better, you know, not being from the film business. I didn't grow up in the film business, so I didn't know what the ranks were or how people should act in different places. So I just got to know him through the first 2 films. So I got a call from Otto to do the post-sound on Harm's Way, which was a story on Pearl Harbor. He wanted it shot in black and white because that was what was available at the time during Pearl Harbor. And he wanted it in mono sound because that was a simple soundtrack and it was simple times. So I got a call from him and he said, well, how would you like to go to Hawaii on a location for about 3 months? And I thought it was a pretty good deal. But then I told him, I don't think I would like to because I didn't want to leave my wife and my son at that time, who was about 3 years old, at home. And for that time period. He says, don't worry about it, Don. I'll hire your wife and pay her as an extra. Which she did. She got a free ride to Hawaii, and we got a small suite at the Ilikai Hotel, which was just opening at that time. And she had a great vacation. And we put our son in Punahou School there, I believe. And so it was good. It was good for us.
So you had 3 months there, the whole family, 3 months.
Oh yeah.
What?
So she got a job. But the main part of that show is that it was a war picture, and it was in black and white, and they did a lot of shooting in and around Oahu and in Hawaii. But something came up, and they said that, hey, we can shoot on the heavy cruiser St. Paul, which was based in Seattle. But Don, you have to be the script supervisor because we can't have a woman on board. Kathleen Fagan was the script supervisor at the time. She could do the shooting around Hawaii because she would go back to the hotel every night, and there was no problem. But there was never, at that time, no woman could stay on board overnight on a ship. So I said, sure.
You became the script girl then.
I became a script girl, right. And I just want to stop at this point because at this school here, we don't teach anything about script supervision. And the script supervisor is probably the most important people during production. The script supervisor has a script, and you probably have seen a line script, those of you who have edited. And what the script supervisor does is she does everything. She keeps track of all the take numbers, all the scene numbers, and lines it how far the take went, and special notes on what happened to the scene, where people were standing, what they were wearing, because it was the Bible that everybody went back to when they had to do reshoots or to do match shots. Now, as far as In Harm's Way was concerned, we would film in Hawaii, we would ship the film back to Hollywood for processing, and then they would fly the dailies back to us. So we never saw dailies for three or four days. We had no idea if anything was good or if it was usable or not. But when we were on that ship, which was in the heavy cruiser St. Paul, we sailed from Seattle. It took us 10 days to cross the Pacific, and we filmed most of that footage that's in the picture on board the ship. And it looked like a battleship, so we used it for a battleship. And we had a uninvited passenger along, and he was the Vice Admiral of the Pacific Fleet. So when we arrived at Pearl Harbor, we got a 17-gun salute.
Wow.
That was something. But even before that, when we were sailing, we met up with the destroyer and we did a ship-to-ship transfer. The destroyer would go at the same speed as the cruiser, and they would fire a cable across, and they would hook up the rig for the conveyance to go from ship to ship. I didn't go across from ship to ship. But the thing I noticed that the first thing that the destroyer sent over, their movies. The first thing we shipped back are movies from the St. Paul, because that's how they got their movies. And that's how they switched their movies.
So you did the script supervision during the day, and then you recorded effects at night, or sound effects at night?
That's right. It was a long day, yeah.
And what kind of things were you recording? What kind of things?
Well, since we were on shipboard for so long, I just recorded everything. I recorded ventilators. I recorded the bells that they have on the ship, and I devoted all the ambience and hatches and just everything. It was, and the gun movements and whatnot. So it was a boon to the show because it was tough stuff to find clean and live in a library.
Now, again, back in those days, did the productions use a lot of, did they have their own effects libraries, the different studios for the productions, or?
The major studios had their own libraries, but they were usually made, the effects were usually made from what we call optical sound. You know, before we had magnetic sound, which is the higher quality sound. Sound was on optical film that was processed in the lab, and it always had a narrow bandwidth, and it had a hiss to it. And but those libraries weren't that, they're not as good as they are today. Today, it's just wonderful. We have one of the best libraries here, right at school, our sound effects library. It's a compilation of all the other libraries, but only their clean and usable material.
And so on the ship, you also recorded the big guns, the guns that are being used in the film as well.
Yeah, but they weren't real. I mean, they were half loads.
Right, right.
Yeah. But we took that and we doubled up on it, and then we equalized the sound, so we used some of that. We sweetened track on top of track to get the sound that we wanted.
Do you want to show that scene?
Yeah, and I just want to add that following In Harm's Way, which was the third picture I did with Otto, he asked me to join him on location on a picture called Hurry Sundown. And it was going to be filmed in Georgia, but it was kind of based on, it had racial undertones, and I decided, well, I don't think I want to go on location to the South with a company that's making a film about racism. So that's where we parted company. I stayed back, and my career went in a different direction. But I have to say here, and I have an underline, working for Otto was an important part of my career, and to me, he was always a friend and exciting filmmaker.
You even watched him getting his head shaved in his office, right?
Oh, you're right.
He's a bald-headed man.
Yeah,
Sure.
that was the thing that I had told. The intimacy of our friendship, I was able to go into Otto's office anytime and just sit and talk to him. And he would shave his head. Like that? Okay. And I still have that picture in my mind. Thank you for bringing that up.
Sure, no.
Okay.
I'm sure he loved looking at your full head of hair while he did that, yes. So why don't we, Stan, why don't we look at the In Harm's Way?
We all know how that ended.
Yes. Yes, not too well, yes. So In Harm's Way, and you were reunited with John Wayne on that, and that was obviously an Otto Preminger film, and but you did not continue to work with Preminger because of Hurry Sundown. So this was the time when your career shifted and you were enlisted by Irwin Allen, I think, to move into the television. Is that correct?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I think we did another film, Butch Cassidy. Was that coming up next? Or no? No, go
Yes,
ahead.
that will be coming up next, but that's not what happened next in your career.
Oh, okay. Oh.
Right?
See, you know my career better than I do.
Yeah, your career better than you.
Where do you find all
Live
this?
vicariously through your head of hair, through your good looks, through your career, all of the things I didn't have. Thank you very much. So you actually now moved into to television for a little while for Irwin Allen before you went on to make those pictures with him, right?
Yes.
What was it like working on? This is my favorite part of the evening because these are all the TV shows I grew up watching: Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, The Time Tunnel, Batman with Adam West, Land of the Giants. You've got to see these shows to believe them, right? So he brought you aboard to do those things, and also in the feature films. What was it like working for him, with Alan?
Well, see, Fox had a department. I hate to say this out of school, but I think everybody knew. It was a typical major sound effects department. It was run by a tyrannical figure who figured that all the good sound effects were only for features. So they were locked away. Anybody working on television at the time that was just starting, they had to use the leftover stuff. And so what they were doing, the caliber of their work was not what Irwin was looking for. So I came in as an outsider. In fact, George Swink, I don't know if anybody here knows that name or not, brought me in. And so I started working there with Irwin Allen's company, and then the Fox sound effects department got really upset that they brought somebody to work on the lot that didn't have the seniority. So they called the union to try and have me evicted so they could get the work back. But the union voted against them. So I was able to stay. And so we ran two parallel departments, my department and then the Fox sound effects department. And as it turned out, I started to get more work, not only the Irwin Allen shows, but from other features that were coming on the lot. And so I was doing some of the feature work too. And so eventually the Fox department closed and I took over, right? So I ran, it wasn't two departments anymore, it was just the Fox sound effects editing department, doing the work for both films.
Okay.
At a point.
And then how did Butch Cassidy come about and working with George Roy Hill on the sound for that?
George Roy, well, that film was a Fox film, right? And it was an interesting show because a lot of the films that came onto the Fox lot at the time, the filmmakers were independent filmmakers, and in this case, he was too. And they didn't want to use the Fox or any major studio sound effects department. So I always stepped up and I said, well, I'll do it for you. See? So that's how that happened.
And so you were able to go on set for some of that too and work with, as Western, obviously.
No, actually, I didn't do any of the, I didn't work on that show during the production time, just the post-production part of it.
But you were able to record sounds with the horses and...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We had, actually, I think this was done at Goldwyn's at the time, not a Fox picture. See, I lose track of time after everything. And so we had horses again, just very much like the Alamo, but we only had about maybe 4 or 5 horses. And we recorded actually out at, on Highway 14 as Velasquez blocks. I'm sure everybody's been out there before the freeway. And you could actually go up there and shoot a picture and it was quiet. But if you went out there today, forget it. In fact, you can't even get out there today. It's where the 14 freeway runs.
So you recorded the horses for them of the chase scene that we're going to see in Butch Cassidy, right?
Right. So the thing that I really did do on that show that I really enjoyed was I decided, hey, these two guys, who are the two guys?
Robert Redford and Paul Newman, yeah.
Robert Redford and Paul Newman. Right. You hear of them? You heard of them? They were a lot of fun because I saw the film and I said, these two are having too much fun in this movie. So I decided, I think I'll do the ADR on this so I can get to know them a little better and enjoy their company. So it wasn't called ADR at the time because there was nothing automatic about the dialogue replacement at the time, and we called it looping. So for you people who are pre-ADR days will know what looping is, but actually what it is taking the picture and the sound in sync, cutting it into loops, making a loop, so it'll play over and over again, and they would run in sync, and we put the picture loop on the projector and the sound loop on the sound machine, and they would play it, and then the actor would hear the soundtrack and see the picture, and we would do it loop by loop. And it's very arduous because you couldn't change the reading, you couldn't combine anything, and if somebody could not loop, couldn't split the loop because you had to go back to the cutting room. So that was the process of the motion picture business.
Were they nice guys to work with?
Oh, they were wonderful. What I really enjoyed about about that looping session was, you know how in between takes when we were putting up the loops, they would talk about their own lives and their own pictures and whatever they're working on. So it was good insight of what was happening. And I never saw two people chew so much gum because throughout the picture they were chewing tobacco. And I wanted them to give us that chewing tobacco sound while they were looping, so the mouth would be full, and that's what they did. We just bought boxes and cartons of gum in, and they would just chew and chew and chew. And I think we were there for about a week, replacing some of those lines.
Do you want to show that? Do we see that?
Sure.
So Stan, good for Butch Cassidy.
This is the train robbery that they started on, and then the secret posse shows up, which you'll see what the secret posse is, and it's just fun. They just have fun totally all the time when they're working and as a group. I think you'll enjoy this.
That's terrific, especially I love the way the horse screams kind of punctuate the explosion and the train, and then the sounds of the train itself, the breathing and the distance in the background of the train. And
Yeah.
that's beautiful.
And director wanted a little different sound for the secret posse. So the thing I could think of at the time was to put it low end and for the horses. That's why whenever we cut the posse, we heard the horses.
And
Gave them a little more power.
that rumble underneath them. Too.
Right.
So speaking of this, I mean, this is obviously beautiful. The layering of the sounds in this is quite beautiful. And you must come up against different kind of directors whose sound is more important for them or less important. What for you over the years has been like the great relationship between working with a director and trying to develop a track?
Well, it varies with all the pictures that I've worked on. Some of the directors that I've had didn't have any experience at all, and others would let you do it, and they're the best ones to work with. But those who are knowledgeable about sound and what sound can do, they can help you a lot because they already have in their mind a preconceived idea of what they want. And usually if that comes out in the pre-production meetings where you would have a sound designer present at the time, I think they do that a lot more now than when we worked. You can get a lot of those ideas over, and you can actually use sound in place of imagery, the picture, to help tell the story. Not only to make it more effective because it's the person that's listening to it that's interpreting that sound what it is, than to actually, and save some money by not having to shoot that, by just hearing sound off camera, what's happening.
And when you sit down to talk to a director about what they want, I mean, what's the most important thing for you to, in the sense of telling the story, how to tell the story better?
Usually, you make your suggestions to the directors. That would be the ideal thing. And some directors have preconceived ideas of what they want, and they will tell you that at the beginning, but they don't get too involved now. It's better to let the sound person who's trained in telling a story with sound. But you can't be conspicuous about it, you know. Anything that you do should not call attention to what it is. It's the person that's seeing the film that interprets it in his own mind, but doesn't know why that certain effect they're hearing that's created by the sound is there.
I mean, in fact, that's what a lot of your teaching is about, is teaching students how to listen, right?
Right.
So that brings us to, I think, your next clip is the French Connection. The idea of working with a director whose sound was very important to. And obviously, Friedkin was somebody who was doing something rather radical in terms of the production of the French Connection, shooting it on location in New York. And he had a lot of ideas about sound and the kind of sounds that he wanted.
Right. He shot in New York and shot in France. But the bulk of the French Connection chase that we're going to see has become a classic. There's no doubt about that. And has been often referred to as the best chase sequence filmed. Some agree with that and some don't, but How many of you know Billy Friedkin? Nice guy, huh? Steve? Right.
Well, for those, William Friedkin directed The Exorcist and many other films, and Chris Newman, who worked on this picture, The French Connection, also worked on The Exorcist with him as well.
What I have to say, he says sweetheart because he's really tough to work with. He's unreasonable at times, but usually on the French Connection, with being with him on the mix stage, the dubbing stage, he was just unbelievable. He was just mean. He was cruel. He was, but what he really does all the time is that he wants the best sound possible, and he's very sound conscious for his films, and for that you have to give him credit, because he will go to no ends to get the sounds that he wants, and his sounds, what he wants, is actually very good. So what happened here was that we did this sequence. Chris Newman was the production mixer. He recorded all the production stuff for on French Connection, and he did an excellent job. Then after this sequence that you're going to see was cut, he went back and recorded all the sounds of the subway and some of the car stuff. So he had fresh, authentic material from a New York, no, it's the L train, actually, is what it is. L train to work with, which really made this sequence. I, on the West Coast, recorded all the sounds of the cars in the chase. And it was a GTO, Pontiac, that was in here. We went down to Westwood Boulevard. They had a used car lot there at the time. And we said, we'd like to rent that car for the day. And they said, okay. And we had a limousine that we wanted to use too, so we rented the limousine from limousine company. And so we brought it back to Fox, and we recorded it. Now, mixer Don Bassman. Everybody knows Don Bassman? Very famous name. He is production mixer on many, many of the epic shows, won Academy Awards. He said, Don, he said, let me record the car stuff for you. And I couldn't believe it, because we didn't do it in stereo at the time. It was a mono show that was stereolized. And so he showed us how to do it. For the long car buys that we had during the show, he placed mics, one here and one there, and though it was a mono track, he made it one long buy when the car drove by. Instead of just having that one peak when you just record the one mic, it goes whoosh. Well, when he recorded, it went shh, and it went out. So, but Chris Newman, he's retired now. He's completing a book on the French Connection. And
Yeah, he has a chapter on the French Connection, and it's a lovely book, and hasn't been published yet, but
hasn't been published.
Galleys, and I was able to read some of the galleys, and Chris Newman's a very famous sound man, and won an Academy Award for The Exorcist, and also for his work on The English Patient, among other pictures. And he writes in this book about recording sound on the French Connection. And he also talks about Don's work. And most importantly, he talks about how during this chase scene where Popeye Doyle, played by Gene Hackman, is chasing a sniper who tried to kill him, chases him onto the elevated train, and the sniper gets on the train and drives away, whereas Hackman is running, chasing after him down the street. And Newman says that when he recorded the sound on location, there's Hackman in the distance chasing the guy from about 40, 50 yards away, and he recorded the sound as it actually sounded. But then when he saw the work that Don did, he heard the footsteps were much closer, and he heard the breathing, Hackman's breathing, as if we were right next to him. And he says that for him, this was kind of a revelatory moment as a sound designer when you had a sound that was not matching the picture. There was actually a contrast between the intimacy of the sound you're hearing, but seeing the character far away. And this created sort of a weird dissonance that made the scene more dynamic than he ever thought it could be. And this is back in 1971 when there really wasn't anything which we call sound design by today's standards. And for Newman, in his book, he says this was one of the first moments when he realized the possibilities that were available to you as a sound person working in the industry. And it's beautiful. I think we can, with that in mind, it's interesting to watch the scene now, the scene that Chris Newman and Don worked together really on pulling this together. Should we take a look?
Yeah, it's a great sequence.
Pretty exciting. Pretty exciting stuff. I think during that entire chase, there's not any music until the end, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think you notice it in a lot of the cuts that you've seen tonight, there's no music in there. Yeah. They let the sound play. In reading back on how this chase was done, a lot of it was illegal. They only had 3 blocks in which to shoot the chase, and they just took it upon themselves to, with Billy Friedkin in the back seat of the car, and just go down through the traffic. They just caught the traffic the way it was. Some of the stuff with the cars crossing in front really happened. It wasn't staged. So
I understand that Hackman did a lot of his own driving too for that.
yeah,
For some of that stuff.
you can see that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's beautiful.
So it's just like driving home at night on the 10 without the L train.
You're the guy I saw driving like that. Okay, so now we get to back to Irwin Allen and in those big movies, the Towering Inferno, the Poseidon Adventure, these big disaster films. And you worked on a couple of those with him after working on these television series with him as well.
Yeah, in fact, I went over there to work on television and the feature films for the disaster movies, as he's known for, with Irwin. And the clip that I want to show you is very short, but it's the first disaster film that he made, and it was the Poseidon Adventure in 1972. And it's the picture of where the ship capsizes. And it's, like I said, it's short. It's only, the scene that you're going to see is only 3 minutes long, but I just wanted to show how the Irwin Allen, who was a television producer, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, started making disaster movies, and this and the Towering Inferno and other films that he made. Just they were fun to work on, if you can call it fun, right? Because they had no dialogue. Right?
Great. Stan, thanks. Who doesn't want to destroy a piano and record it? Fantastic. So what was it like working for him? I mean, you obviously started working with him on the television programs, which had very much smaller budgets, I imagine, of course.
He was good to work for. He just gave us a free hand for the sound, what we wanted to do on all his shows, on the television shows and on his feature shows. And he had and at the time of the disaster movies, they were so successful that once this film was made, that Fox was just giving him a large budget and everything. So there was never any question on, no, you can't work overtime or anything like that. So it's good.
So now we come to a clip of one of your favorite films and maybe one of your favorite experiences working in film, and that's work with Mel Brooks on Young Frankenstein.
Young Frankenstein, 1974. Had I known at that time in 1974, probably at the beginning of my career, that this would be a lasting film or a cult film, a film that everybody knows, I would have never thought about it. I probably would have treated it with more regard. That I am now a success, but it was just another film that we were doing that was kind of, well, I didn't know Mel Brooks at the time. But, you know, the clip that we're going to see is a little long because this was Mel Brooks' 90th birthday, just he celebrated about less than a month ago. So they had re-released the film for one day. And they had Mel at the Fox studio, and they had a TV camera on him, and they flashed him on the screen to talk to the audience. I wasn't there, I didn't see it. So that's why I just combined two scenes. Now, what you're going to see here, well, Mel's comedy is in this film was very subtle. So there's nothing slapstick about it. You're going to see young Frankenstein, whose grandfather, Frankenstein, died. And he is going to Transylvania to visit the castle. And this is when he arrives at the station, and he meets Igor. And then they go up to the castle, and then well, you can see from there how. And a lot of it, because this cast was so talented, they ad-libbed it a lot. You'll hear a line in there about peanut butter. That was ad-libbed. But it's just, it's so subtle, but yet it works so well. And it was only after, I can say this even with Mel still alive and it gets back to him, when he started appearing in his own films that I thought they were started to slip a little bit and didn't have the subtleties that this film has.
Well, we happen to have Mel Brooks over here, and he just heard you. Shall we take a look at the scene? You want to see it? And we can.
Let's see, I'm just looking at this to see if I missed it. Oh, when we were mixing this film, we mixed it over at Goldwyn. Another thing, when Mel didn't want this film edited at Fox because he had just finished Blazing Saddles, which was, the fart movies. And it was a big success, but he had a very, very bad experience at Warner Brothers. And so when he came over to Fox and he said he didn't want to do the sound work there, I said, Mel, I'll do it for you. You just give me a chance. Okay, so I cut the film for him. And, but when we were mixing it, we had to keep the Foley stage open. We were over at Goldwyn's because he would get these ideas to make something, to record something, and we'd run in there, we'd record it, I would cut it in, and we'd go ahead with the mix. But I did win Mel over because I did his second movie, which was called Silent Movie, right, which is great, no dialogue. One word of dialogue there from the mime. What was the mime's name? And then we had to loop it. Because
Really?
the production track was bad. One word. So it was a fun experience with Mel.
So,
Happy to be associated with it.
yes, it's a very, very funny movie. So you eventually became the post-production supervisor for Disney, right?
Well, actually, I had an opportunity to move ahead, and I thought I would leave sound editing for a while. I became a post-production supervisor for not only for Quinn Martin, which we talked about before, but for Aaron Spelling as well. Then I moved on to, then I became a suit at Disney. I was post-production, head of post-production, vice president of post-production. It sounds wrong, weird. So I was sitting in the mix one day of Good Morning Vietnam, and director Barry Levinson was mixing a song over a montage of the war. It was Louis Armstrong's What a Wonderful World. It was an emotional moment, and I welcomed Satchmo back into my life, along with the rest of the country, and he remains with us today. But the song was put over a montage of, I would say public cruelty and scenes of war, children being shot and whatnot. I thought possibly that he wanted to temper the montage, the content of the montage, for ratings, for rating purposes, but it still ended up with an R. But still, it brought Satchmo back to us. And this all kind of takes place with when Robin Williams, he's the disc jockey for Armed Forces Radio. He was kind of sad because he didn't feel that he was reaching the troops or helping the troops in any way in building their morale. Until at the end of this traffic jam, when he talked to the troops, he found out how much he was doing and how much was being appreciated. So the next morning is when this song takes place, when he dedicates this song to the soldiers that he had just talked to. And I thought it was a fitting way to bring this to a close.
And you feel that one of the reasons for using this song was there's an irony between what we're actually watching on screen,
Right.
the lyrics of the song,
Right.
and at the same time maybe perhaps to soften the impact of the brutality of what we're actually witnessing.
Right.
Okay. Stan, are we ready for that? Tribute to the great Robin Williams, too. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting to end these clips from, we started with one kind of war picture and we ended with quite a different kind of war picture. It's lovely. Why don't we take a second to open it up to some questions here? You know, we've...
Anybody but Mitch.
Don, when you were working on Young Frankenstein, did Mel ever want you to use anything specifically relating back to the original James Whale Frankenstein film from the 1930s?
No, not at all. It stood on its own. As you can see that they're entirely two different kinds of films. This was a comedy and the other one was really serious. Yes.
Young Frankenstein sounded like it had like the feel of those old movies. So did you use, I don't know, old microphones or EQing or something to get
But I'll tell you what,
sound?
when you heard those door knockers, you heard optical hiss. That's why you were so thin. Because Mel wanted to use the old sounds that was just not clean, crisp, and pure. And it was just a little bit offbeat. So a lot of the sound effects that were used had optical hiss in it. Optical hiss is when it's that, the old optical track before we had mag track where we could do some noise reduction, it had that behind it. I think that's what you probably heard. Not the dialogue track. Dialogue track was, it was very important that we heard every word. And I think we accomplished that.
Anyone else? Frau Blucher?
And I kept hearing you say in numerous instances that you stepped forward at times and said, let me do that. Give me a chance to do that.
Right.
So where did that confidence or that courage come from, that you felt that you could do that?
Well, I was in an environment, this is the Fox Studios, and they had that sound editing department that was not very accomplished or very cooperative and whatnot. And I came in from the independent field where we did everything. And I didn't see any films or any projects that came in that I couldn't work on and help. So I could actually have said that. It wasn't a sales pitch. It was actually sincere. So I was a working sound editor and department head at the same time because I did so much work. Jed.
So we came to USC about the same time, and you'd already had an amazing career at that point. But the sound department here, the sound division here, is just has been so influential in the entire treatment of sound in film, and you have a whole amazing array of people who have come out of the training here to go on and influence the whole idea of sound design and using sound in a non-literal way. And I wonder what your perspective is on that now that you've been teaching here for a fair amount of time.
I remember reading the documents on the formation of the school in 1929, the principals that were involved in that. And there was a sound person in there. And it was, I think it's just the philosophy of the school, that's been carried through for a consciousness, because we do want to teach every phase of motion picture making at this school. That is one of our secrets for our success, and the secrets for the success of our filmmakers, because they're well versed in everything. And we've always had 100%, if not more, background as far as sound is concerned, and sound has always been a very strong department here. I got a call. I don't know if anybody here knows Jimmy Nelson or not, the name Jimmy Nelson. Okay. Jimmy Nelson called me up in the fall of 1996, and he said, hey, I got a job offer at USC. They wanted me to teach, but I don't want to do it, because, you know, Jimmy was a very shy person. And he said, can you go down there and fill in for me for one semester? I said, okay, if it's only one semester. Well, I came down and I ended up in that small room teaching 310, which with about 30 students in there. We don't have 30 students in there anymore. And then we had a TV monitor, which is about this size. I think that's still around. And that's where I started. And I just fell in love with working with the kids and sharing what I know, because they were so curious at the time about everything. And I just hung around.
But this also sounds like it's a theme in your life, even in your career. I mean, from what I understand, you're quite well known for helping people who worked with you in your department underneath you, helping them move up in their own careers. A lot of people attribute you with their start in the motion picture business. So it sounds like giving back and helping people learn and grow and excel is something that's kind of part of your mentality from the beginning.
I feel that way. I don't think that anything we do is really exclusive, and it's a collaborative art. I mean, nobody here can do anything by themselves alone in the making of a motion picture. And if I can help someone find a job, move on, give some experience, give some, not experience, but give some explanation as to what to do, fine. That's what we're here for. And I think all our instructors are like that. They can, I know Steve Flick probably has.
You gave me my first union job.
I gave you your first union
The
job?
first steady
Damn,
paycheck.
No, I remember Steve. He was a budding sound editor.
1978. Barnaby Jones and the Runaways.
That's right. Ray Martin.
It's interesting because I try to do the opposite. I try to crush the dreams of the. It won't work for me. Any other questions out there, Midge?
I want to ask you a question, Don. So what do you attribute what do you think is the most important thing, or name a few things what do you attribute your success, but also your longevity in the industry? Like, I don't know if anyone I've never said your name and heard anyone say anything negative.
Thank you. You can do that now.
No, but seriously, what do you think that is? What is it about you?
I think it's just being fair to anybody that I'm associated with on a project or not on a project. Usually below the line people, you know what above the line and below the line means here in here? Above the line are the actors and the producers and the directors, and below the line, the rest of us. We have to hang together, and there's no harm in helping someone. I mean, you will tell me if a job is available. I know. And if you're walking down the hall, somebody can say, hey, are you working, Don? I said, no. I said, well, so-and-so is just looking for somebody. And that's how the business is, you know, it's, we help each other. But I don't do it intentionally, it's just, it just comes natural. And I think everybody in this room feels the same way about helping people, helping their fellow workers.
Frankly, I think it's just because you're so damn good looking. And you always have been, based on the photographs that I've actually seen. You know, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this issue up, just, you know, before it's too late. But you are Chinese American, and we live in a time now where diversity is a very important thing and a very controversial issue, and always has been. And I'd asked you this question before, but I want to bring it up again in terms of how difficult was it for you, or in terms of the industry, or in terms of your personal life, have you found things to be based on your ethnicity? Have you found it to be an asset? Has it been problematic?
I wasn't aware of it at all, of any of it at all, if there was anything about don't hire Don because he's not, you know, one of us. I think probably my name, Hall, had a lot to do with it. I don't know, but I didn't really run into that. It was only recently that people started saying that the diversity issue started coming up as far as I was concerned. Because to me, it was just a job is a job, and working with everybody in the business is just, we just accept everybody. That's what's so wonderful about this business. We don't have color lines or anything like that.
Now, you did say you'd had trouble, I mean, yourself, you and your wife, when you moved down here from San Francisco originally, just...
Oh, it broke her heart. When we moved out here from San Francisco, that was in 1951, we moved in the Valley, and we decided that she was going to teach out in Tarzana. She's a school teacher. And we decided we're not going to move any further west than Studio City because that was the end of the world, okay? But then we decided we had to. We were moving out to Sherman Oaks or whatnot. And every place that we went to and we looked at for an apartments, they turned us down. She got to a point where she was so bothered by it that she said, you go up there and you talk to them and you see if the place is available and if they'll rent to us. And we did find a German woman that just had a new 8-unit apartment building that rented to us in Sherman Oaks. And then we wanted to buy a house, and we were not able to buy a house because the realtors wouldn't sell it to us. So we bought a lot and we built a house. That diversity right now is, I mean, not diversity, but that prejudice now does not exist anymore from a real estate standpoint as far as the agents are concerned. I think the agents have become, at this point, probably maybe invisible.
All right, great. So what you found was, I mean, you did experience this kind of, these issues in your personal life, but
Yeah.
but actually in the business, you haven't found it to be
No.
a problem. That's
Not knowingly,
yeah.
not knowingly. There may have been some talk.
Well, you seem like you have 90 movies there, so I guess there don't seem like too many you missed out on, actually. I can't imagine how many you did. Anyone else, any
I was lucky.
questions? Anybody else have any? Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, MASH is just such a wild film with all the improvisation and the overlapping and lavaliers, I think. Could you talk about that experience?
Yeah, I was working at Fox at the time that we did the original MASH movie. And I also worked on the television for about 6-7 years too. And it was a film that was so unusual where everybody was talking, like you said. It had a lot of overlap dialogue that the people at Fox, the people that mattered at the time, really didn't understand what they had in the film, the style of it, because it was so advanced. So they just said that, hey, Don, we got a picture here that, can you see it through post and also mix it for us? I mean, supervise the mix for us, because they didn't want anything to do with it because they didn't know what it was. And as it turned out, it became one of their hits and one of their best television series. So I get jobs like that. You know, when you're on the lower rung, you get a lot of stuff like that nobody wants to do. That's how I got that film that you want to see. What was the name of that film?
Not too many, there's so many. The Vanishing Point?
No,
No, which one?
the other one that you said you,
Captain Sinbad?
no.
All the movies I love are the ones he hates. The ones like, oh, that's that thing. I'm like, dude, those were the greatest. No, anyway. Oh, Russ Meyer, the
Russ Meyer, right,
Beyond the Valley of the Dolphins. Yes.
right.
Yeah. There's going to be a screening of that after this. Anybody wants to stay back at my place? Let's talk 1 second about the academy. When were you made a member of the academy and became a governor? When did that happen?
Well, I became a member of the Academy in 1964. That's many years. I was brought in by a movement when they wanted to bring in youth into different branches, and I was young at the time, okay? So I got in the Academy. And then I took a very active part in the Academy. I was a governor for 18 years. I gave that up about maybe a year and a half ago. But I'm still on a lot of committees. I'm on the International Committee. I'm on the, what they call a SciTech Committee. And I'm on a committee now to try and bring back some of the older members because we had a bad thing that happened saying that the Academy wanted to phase out all the older members. And it just got out of hand and it got very misunderstood. And I'm still the co-chair with Greg Helvey. Anybody here know Greg Helvey? Do you have him in your class? He's a Student Academy Award winner, and I'm a co-chair with him for Student Academy Awards, and that's a very exciting thing. That always starts our Academy Award season, and we'll be doing that very shortly. And we hope to see many films from USC.
There's no conflict of interest.
No conflict of interest. It just helps.
Anybody else? Anything else? Well, good. I think I'll wrap it up. And I want to thank you all for coming. And I want to thank Mr. Hall for joining us and sharing his career with us tonight. Thanks again.